Professor, I don't think we can hear you. I don't know if I'm the only one that can't hear him. I think he's muted. I think he might be muted. There you go.
And now, hi, I can't hear me. I'm going to try to unmute everybody to see where we're at.
Hello.
Okay, now, there we go. Yeah, that becomes feedback on somebody's machine.
Hi.
Like that. Is that feedback?
Sounds like somebody's playing a video back there.
Still have feedback? No feedback. No. Maybe that's where the feedback loop is coming. So when you want to chime in, just unmute yourself.
In fact, I think I hear my own voice on somebody's computer.
I think it's mine.
Okay.
So what I wanted to lay out for you guys tonight is how
So maybe you could stop that, Adriana.
Oh, let me see. Can I mute myself?
You can mute yourself, but if you could hold off on that video, that would help too.
With not a large district.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm sorry for the delay. Kim, if you can find the video icon, then we can see you too.
How's that?
There we go.
Okay.
So we have a bunch of new faces, okay, for our class. Let me unmute everybody. Hold on a second. And so we're going to get to introductions in a sec. Let me share with you our agenda for tonight. So we'll do some introductions, okay? And we'll check in to see how everybody's doing with their internship, both in progress and just getting off the ground. Since we are an expanded group now, I think it's time for us to revisit and establish a new set of working agreements for us, okay? Then the main topic tonight is going to be talking about schools that work for all kids, right? And looking at this idea of inclusive versus expansive schools. It's sort of a new approach to thinking about this. So we'll do that. We'll take a break for about 10 minutes, give everybody a little rest. That should be right around 7. We'll get into our ongoing projects, the equity audits, action research, see how they're going for those of us who are underway, and questions for those of us who are just getting started. And preview the upcoming work, and then a little closing exercise, and then we're out. Okay, so let's stop the share. There we go. So let's just start with introductions. Okay, I've met everybody. We all don't know each other. We are still waiting on 2 class members. I'm not sure where they are, but they'll just have to join us as we're going. And before you start to share anything, I'm trying to make a practice of recording the classes so that in case somebody can't make it, they can go back and watch the video afterwards. But I want to make sure I have everybody's permission to do that. Everybody's okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, great. Let's see. We'll take volunteers. There's not too many of us. Who would like to just tell us your name, where you're working, what you're doing there? And it would help to know, because some of us are new, where you are in this leadership program and in the internship. Okay.
I guess I'll start us off. My name is Adriana. I work at North Star Academy. I am a 4th grade teacher there. I work at a school in Newark. I enjoy serving the kids in the city of Newark. And I started grad school about a year ago, then took a small break. And then, so I'm just starting the internship portion and basically just getting into my action research topic, thinking about what I wanted to do for that, and thinking about where my equity audit topic might be as well. So I'm in the beginning stages. I've been teaching since 2014. So just looking to move into leadership within the next couple of years.
Thanks.
I'll go next. My name is Kim Bunch. I currently work for Franklin Township Board of Education in Somerset County. I have been a special education supervisor for the past 6 years. And prior to that, I was in the classroom since 2006. Education is a second career for me. So this is my very first class in this process in terms of working towards my principalship. So I am also in the very early stages of the internship process, as well as the equity audit, as well as the action research.
Awesome. What was your first career?
I was in business.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just doing the math. I've been doing this now. This is my career. I've been doing this 32 years.
Wow.
I know, it's crazy. my first class of kids are like in their 40s. Who'd like to go next?
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Chaya Gruber. I work for the New York City Department of Education. I was a PE teacher for 12 years in Brooklyn and in the Bronx. And I taught APE and physical education. And currently, I work for the Office of School Wellness Programs within the DOE as a PE instructional coach. And I support schools with anything having to do with health, PE, and wellness. This is my second semester of the internship class. I've been in the program since last spring, so I'm kind of I've done a nice portion of it, so I'm happy about that. And yeah, that's pretty much who I am.
Awesome. Susanna?
Yes. My name is Susanna. I'm currently teaching Elizabeth Public Schools. This is my 6th year teaching. I'm also this is the first part of the internship for me this semester. I've been teaching more with bilingual education and ESL students. I'm still working on the topics as well. I just started this class about a week ago, so I'm just catching up with everything.
Right. So I've been trying to get you all, new folks sort of caught up on where we're at. We did have a kind of a content-heavy start to the course, so don't fail to ask a lot of questions, right? And we'll also, as a regular part of class, kind of do a preview of what's to come, right? And to the extent that you want to ask questions of people who've been doing this longer, please go for it. I'm not going to be the only one with the knowledge about this, and especially when it comes to knowing how to juggle, right, the different parts of this internship. In some ways, Chaya and Kim being kind of not in the classroom, it's a little easier to find the time than it is for Adriana and Susanna, right? So, and when you meet Sam and Tiffany, they're both also in classrooms, and so trying to do all that juggling is, is a challenge. It really is. But we all do it. Everybody's made it. Haven't lost one yet. So coming back to the agenda here for a sec. You're going to see me. I'm going to jump back and forth now, sort of between slides and talking. But those of you who are a little bit new to Zoom, you'll notice that you'll still be able to see all of us in a set of thumbnail windows along the side, okay? Also, in case you haven't found it yet, in the current screen you have, in the upper right, you can click back and forth between a speaker view, where currently you'll see me, large and in charge kind of in the middle, and you may see other people small up top, or what's called the gallery view, where we're all in our own equal sized windows around the thing. So whatever works for you is up to you. If you happen to miss class and you're catching up with the video, what you're going to see is my viewpoint, okay? Because mine is the machine that's recording, okay? So just for your information. So as I switch to the slides, here we go. So the question for us is going to be this idea of working agreements. I've used all over the place. I've used it in classes. I've used it in school board committees. I've used it in faculty meetings. I've used it when I was a community organizer. I've used it all over the place. The idea is, what do we need amongst us as a group of colleagues and professionals to make this go well? Okay. As an example, you know, I particularly in these classes in the leadership program, one of the things that people have often proposed is that whatever we say here stays here, right? So that we can have those kind of confidential conversations that we need to have. Others, you know, starting and ending on time is a frequent one. I've been in different groups where people needed encouragement to talk because they were real quiet, and other people needed encouragement to listen because they did too much talking, right? So, but, you know, what I'd like to hear from you is what works well for you in a class and also in a group. And also, frankly, this is my first time doing this with Zoom, right? So what are the kinds of things that you really want to make sure that we do? I'm going to stop sharing this screen and instead share a whiteboard in which I'll start writing the things that we're talking about. So does anybody have any that they want to throw out there?
One of them, I think potentially could be, we do something like this in our diversity sessions at my job. And I think one of them that potentially might be impactful is, it's like a 48-hour rule. So like if we're going over something and we're at the time, we don't want to ask the question, we don't want to appear to be as if we don't know, or we don't want to be embarrassed. If after 48 hours you still feel uneasy about it or whatever the discussion was, again, bringing it back up and presenting it to the table. So that could be hopefully a teachable moment for you and whomever you're going with, or in this case, a teachable moment for like all of us.
That's cool. So it, 48-hour rule.
Hours or 24 hours, but it's one of those.
That's an interesting idea. So in the last class, class I was teaching last semester, we had something like that. I wonder if this is it. We called it rewind, which is, you know, there was something that came up for me in that last class.
Right.
It's still sitting with me. I still want to deal with it. So can I call a rewind and we go back and revisit it? Is that the same idea?
Yes, exactly.
All right, great. Anything else anybody's got?
I think maybe just to be able to be willing to share or collaborate on different aspects, as we're all coming, you know, from different walks of districts and lives and career paths. That willingness to provide potential information that may be a benefit to other members of the class. So for instance, if I do something a particular way in my district and someone has something very similar, to, you know, feel that they have that openness to be able to share that, because there may be things that you're doing that I'm doing that maybe what I'm doing isn't quite as good as what somebody else is doing. To be able to, you know, continually have that open collaboration.
Cool. Thank you. That's a great one.
I have something to share. I'm not sure if this is a working agreement, but I just find it that's very, I worked at 2 different districts, and I find it very odd. Both my principal and my vice principal, they do the observations, the classroom observations for teachers, but they will let you know when they're coming and work with you on your observation, even if it's announced or unannounced. Is that part of a working agreement, you would say, or?
Well, I'm trying to think. This is kind of between us, actually. Right?
Okay.
Like, what are the things amongst us that we want?
Oh, okay.
So, a version of that might be, you don't want any surprises from me.
Right.
right? Like if you were trying to recreate that, right? It's like, don't spring any pop quizzes on me. Don't just show up unannounced. And if don't show up unannounced at my school, for example,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Oh, okay.
is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
No.
But you like an environment that's sort of predictable and where there's support. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. That's helpful, right? Because if we make that a working agreement, for example,
Mhm.
and I've done something that's unpredictable or I'm not giving you the support you need,
Mhm.
then you and everybody else can call me on that. Right? That's what makes it a working agreement. It's like, hey,
Okay.
we said we were going to do this, and you're not doing that.
Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
Likewise, as with Kim's piece, right? If anybody's sitting back and going, gee, I don't really know if my experience with this is going to be helpful to anybody, I'm just going to keep that to myself. Kim is sort of inviting us to say, no, bring that forward, right?
Right.
Share that stuff because there's stuff there we could all learn. Okay? How do you feel about the begin and end on time piece? For some people that's an issue, for others it's not. Let me be honest. I was a little uncomfortable this evening, right? You guys showed up at 6. I'm like, well, let's hold it open till 10 past. And, I just feel a little bit betwixt and between in that moment. So I would like to know what people would like to do.
I think my thoughts is, if that's when our start and end time is going to be, that's when the start and end time should be. And I would rather, if I had a personal conflict, to at least be able to reach out to you and be able to say, I'm going to be 15 minutes late. So like for me, I was kind of late getting in. This is my first time actually doing this as well. So I clicked on the wrong group to join, and I actually teach a grad class on Thursday night, so I had to leave to get here on time, and with traffic, I barely got here for 6 o'clock. So with it being my first time, I knew I may have been, I was a minute or so late in joining. But I think starting on time and ending on time works well for me.
Yeah, I think it works. The timing is great for me as far as my schedule, but I don't mind waiting around. I do understand that, things happen.
So maybe what I can do is I can also just build in some opening activities that, just like I would do with any class, right? Here's something, keep your mind occupied for a few minutes. It'll be up there at 6. And then, we can start together a few minutes into it. So I can do that.
Sounds good. Gives us a little time to think.
Yeah, right, exactly. Anybody have anything else that has been really valuable for them, let's say in PD groups? Here's one that I've heard in other places. I don't know if you want it. Is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Because we may be talking about some challenging stuff, and you might be like, ooh, I don't know. And that's also a willingness to push each other a little bit, right? Because we have quite a variety of experiences we already know about.
Mm-hmm.
Let me put that up. Okay. Now let me say, because there's 7 of us, I want to hold off on making sure this is it until we've had a chance with everybody, right, to go over them. But any of us, almost like Adriana was saying with this 48-hour rule, we can always edit these. If something in this isn't working for you, we can come back and say, hey, wait a second. Maybe we'll call that the next class rule or something like that, because it's rather infrequently that we come back, or that we're together. But the other key thing about working agreements, and then we'll move off of this, is that it's not up to me to be the enforcer of these things. This is really amongst all of us, right? So if somebody's not doing what they agreed to, it's up to all of us, really. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, great. So let me save that. Okay, good. Get rid of it. All right. Cool. All right. So coming back to the main point for the lesson tonight is one of the things I want to ask you. You guys know this. Have you ever seen this graphic? The cat who looks in the mirror and sees a lion, right?
Yeah.
So one of the questions I'm wanting to ask you is, as you've been reading through George's book, Theo Harris's book, do you recognize yourself? Do you recognize maybe amongst these principles that he's been profiling, do you recognize a kind of leadership that you might aspire to? Or not? You don't have to. I'm asking. Anybody in there sound like, oh yeah, I would. That person said what I would say, or I would like the opportunity to grapple with those same questions. Or, that's a cool idea.
While I've been reading the book, I find that I like a lot of the things that are said, and I agree with a lot of the things that are said. And I do feel like some of the ideas are things that I've recently are highlighted where I'm working, and so it's become part of my life, and it's something that I'm passionate about now as well. So I do identify a lot with what I'm reading in the book. I didn't bring my book up here, and I have stuff highlighted, and now I'm like so annoyed. Because
if you want to take a second and go get it, you're welcome to.
Then my kids are all gonna, notice I'm here and
Pandora's box.
trail with me coming back in.
Gotcha.
So I'll go get it.
Anybody else? What do you think?
I think for me, our district has a very large initiative in the past year and a half that actually pertains to equity and social justice and injustice throughout our district. And I think that's given me the perspective of beginning to really start to think and realize that I need to look at things as a whole, not just as a part, even though a lot of these principles talk about the different parts and the different steps. And I think for me, moving forward as a current administrator, but at central office level, I've already started to put some of these processes into effect for the upcoming school year in terms of, looking at adjusting the way we place students in the special education system in terms of least restrictive environments. It shouldn't be the notion of, oh, they can't do that. The notion needs to be, are they capable of doing it? Not being able to do it is very different than can't being able to, if you can't do it. So looking at just kind of realigning the way my programs are currently running, specifically my inclusion classes. And that is going to be a very uncomfortable conversation with my staff, because right now I've really given them the flexibility of being able to work collaboratively with their general education partner. But what I'm seeing over the years is that our populations of resource room students and self-contained students continue to grow, and my inclusion population continues to shrink. And that's just not something that sits with me very comfortably.
Can I just ask a clarifying question there?
Yeah.
When you say grow and shrink, you
Sorry,
mean
you would have been in
numbers
the
growing
you would have been in the video.
rather than
Yeah, number-wise. So we have a
Number-wise.
greater number of resource room students and self-contained students than we do students that are currently in inclusive settings.
Gotcha.
So those pull-out programs and then just all those programs where students that only have IEPs are in those classes. And that has really led me to rethink, you know, and kind of stop and say, hey, you know, what are we doing as a group? What, you know, looking at teachers, child study teams, and my leadership role with those collaborative teams. And we are looking at implementing different strategies for those team teaching environments where children that can do it, or maybe not, they're not actually doing it now, it doesn't mean that they can't do it. So kind of taking can't off the table, and having the staff relook at, well, what do we need to be able to do so that it will happen?
Right, right. Presuming, have you ever heard the idea of presuming competence?
Yes.
Yeah, we presume that they can.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're going to build. You're reminding me of a discussion I remember having with a fourth grade team, and I was the relatively new principal in the building. I think it was my second year there, and they were doing what you were talking about, Kim. They were referring more and more kids out of the classroom to resource room and so forth, and we were talking about, look, it's our responsibility to figure out how our kids learn and then teach that way, right? That's up to us. We're the adults, we're the professionals, we got to figure that piece out. And rather than just kind of teaching the same way we've always taught, and if a kid doesn't respond to that, then somebody else take them away and fix them and bring them back. And they were saying, well, what happens if we do all that work and the kid doesn't step up and do their part? I said, he'll be illiterate. he won't learn to read. Like that. What they were wanting to do is they were wanting to figure, well, if somebody else just takes care of it, then it won't be my responsibility that the instruction was never right.
Right. I'm
like, no. You can't give up on your responsibility there. And of course everybody's got a role to play in here, right? But they kind of, there's this mix of, I want to keep doing what I was always doing, but I want to be assured that nothing bad is going to happen.
Right. And I think that goes back to that comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Right.
I don't think that a lot of people like to become uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Susanna and Adriana, what are you finding in the book, if anything?
The one thing that popped out to me, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Was Principal Meg, where she wanted to and have smaller classrooms for all students to have the inclusion. But then it says that instead of classroom teachers receiving training to get dual certification in general ed and ESL, and not having the students being pulled out to give them those services, you know, isn't it requiring this or imposing this on the teacher? Like,
say more about that.
Like a regular ed teacher comes up to me all the time and she says, I don't know how you do it. I don't know what you were thinking. Like, teaching the content and teaching the language at the same time is so much work. So if Principal Meg required her to do an extra certification just to keep the classroom sizes down, would that be a fair process? Or?
Well, you can't make somebody go out and get another certification, but you can make decisions about who you're going to hire.
Oh.
Right. You can say, I'm only hiring people with dual certification. Mm-hmm. Right. And then you build that expertise, and you have that capacity in your building through hiring. Right. Which is why places like us are offering dual certification more and more. because we know that makes our teacher candidates more valuable out there, right?
Mhm.
But you also run into another interesting issue there, where people often will assume that the only person who can deliver a particular service is the person with the specialized certificate to do it, which is not true.
Right.
Right? And there's nothing in the law ever that says that, right? So, and when you break it down to the particular skills that of language acquisition, let's say between a kid with a language disability and a kid who's learning English as their second or third language, those actual skills are not all that different to teach and to learn, right? It's very much, early literacy is kind of early literacy,
Mhm.
right? And so you can, a lot of schools, and what you see in the book is Principal Tracy did this whole model of what they start to call blended services, right? Where you create these pairs of co-teachers per classroom. And they're taking responsibility for all the kids, whatever labels school has put on them. They're taking responsibility for all of those kids in that room. If they then need to turn around, if the ESL teacher then needs to turn around afterwards and collaborate with the special ed teacher and say, hey, could you help me out with this kind of on a consultant basis and help figure out what's a better technique here for reaching these kids who have these IEPs, then you can do that back behind the scenes, right, in terms of collaboration. And then you bring it forward into the classroom. Am I making sense there?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that blended services model can work very well. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for the teachers, for sure, right? But it's kind of a pay me now, pay me later sort of thing. Like, somebody's going to be working seriously hard to educate
I think that would be a lot of work.
guys, right? But that's it. And then for us as principals, it's about creating the collaboration time and opportunities and ways of doing that for people to actually be able to pull that off. Right? Yeah. Adriana, what was striking you?
When you think about, as you mentioned, the blended services, it truly resonated to me because it seems like something that we're doing now in our school and in our classroom. When I think about all of our scholars being in one room, based on like ability or whether they have a disability, it kind of just was like jaw dropping. Currently, what we do is we have 2 teachers in the classroom, and we are accountable for all of our scholars. And then we do collaborate with our special education team in order to meet certain kids' needs, but they're in the classroom majority of the day. 45 minutes out of the day, maybe they're not in the classroom. So when I think about moving forward, or what I would want my school to have in the future, would be that collaboration with like the special education team, to ensure that like the kids are in the classroom. And I think about like having 2 teachers in the classroom like isn't always possible for every school, but just thinking about staying where I am, I think that'll just be an asset that I would always want to like keep in our building.
It's a great notion. As a matter of fact, you guys have already led me to something I was going to do next. I was going to hold it off for a minute, but let's try it now. This is a little bit of a new Zoom skill for me, so we'll see how this goes. We're gonna do some polling here. I'm gonna send you a series of questions to answer, and we'll see what the results are together. Okay, so here it comes. Does everybody have it? Susanna, did you get the poll? Okay, great. So if everybody can choose their answers, then we'll get a chance to compare and see how the data goes across all 4 schools.
So some of the answers I could give multiple.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, well then just choose it, just pick a tip. Yeah, exactly. So number 1, you should be able to
Yeah,
give.
that one I can, but the other, like, really like the number 2, it depends on the student, what.
Yeah, so you have to just say typical. Go with typically, what's happening.
I just lost my poll.
You did.
Uh-huh.
That's weird. Could it be hiding behind another window?
Maybe. So give me a moment. Let me check. No.
For number 4, my school doesn't provide OT, PT, or gifted and talented.
Okay.
So I can't submit. So can I just put
Okay,
like
fine. Sure.
what? Okay.
Okay, I found it again. Sorry.
All right.
I'm behind.
No worries. It's only been 2 minutes.
Technology, you'll see, it's a little rough for me.
Hey, listen, that's why I was very transparent about the fact that I'm just trying this for the first time with this. It says to me that 3 out of 4 folks have voted, so somebody's votes are not being recorded, I think.
I'm one of those.
Okay.
Because I'm having a hard time getting it to scroll down.
You have enough for yourself?
Yeah, I have a car.
I don't know if I could show you what's going on mine. I think that's too meta.
Like I've gotten through just to question 1. I can't seem to get it to go, even if I like drag and
Oh, really?
click and bring it down. Let me just, oh wait, there it is. Hold on.
Oh,
I
right.
got it. I got it now.
Cool.
Sorry, guys.
No problem. That's why we're experimenting.
Typically spending their job. Okay, sorry.
No problem. All set?
Mhm.
All right, so I'm going to share the results and you should see it now. This is fascinating. So did you get the results? You should be able to see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious, what does that say to you? Any impressions? How do you make sense of those numbers?
That spoke out to me. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Something that spoke out to me was, I mean, I like the fact that many of us voted, or 50% of us voted at least, that the special education support, the kids are generally in their classroom more than 80% of the day. And ESL, the kids are typically spending more than 80% of their day in their general education classrooms. So again, it just speaks to like the inclusion aspect of it and just keeping the kids in the general education population.
Yeah, that's strong. Kim, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think that I think looking at just the available services that the four different, that we all, from the different areas we all come from, the ESL, the RTI, the special ed, and the emotional behavioral support is a huge component, and we're on the right track. I just, like I said with us a little earlier, a lot of our students are out of the gen ed class most of the day. And that's something that doesn't sit well with me. I mean, I'm not sure about the size of the districts where everybody else, comes from. I mean, I supervise over 100 teachers in 6 different elementary schools. We have over 10,000 kids in our district. So I know with more numbers come, additional programs, but for us, I definitely see that the tide has to change.
Yeah, so you have 10,000. Susanna, how many kids in your district?
Oh my God, a lot. We have Elizabeth Charter School is one of the largest districts in New Jersey.
So we have pretty large schools. So we have Elizabeth, well, you're in a charter, right? And then of course, High is in second largest district in the whole country, right? So yeah, that's really interesting.
So I guess I was the only one with no speech or occupational therapy.
Yeah, that's fascinating. No speech, no OT.
Yeah.
No PT. Wow. So do kids have those services written into their IEPs?
For me?
Yeah.
I don't have special education students. I'm not sure if they do, but we don't provide those services. I don't see it in the school.
You don't see them. That's interesting. That might be an interesting thing to take a look at when you go through your equity audit.
What other districts does they have?
Yeah, because there's somebody doing it, but the fact that it's not evident to you where and how is interesting.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think we have an occupational. We don't have it.
So it might be interesting to find out how, because kids may very well have OT goals that are being written, and then how are those being met? Or is the district just not even attempting?
I don't think they are.
Yeah, that's interesting. That could be a huge issue if somebody surfaced that. Right. And then, Kim put her finger on something, that's going on in her district, and Adriana commented on it on the reverse, which is it often happens that when you have this continuum of other spaces, a resource room, self-contained room, a wing, another school, out of district placement, that often gets to be the what they call the field of dreams, right? Mm-hmm. If you build it, they will come, right? And those spaces get filled up, and then there's a waiting list behind them, right? And so one of the approaches that you saw that some of the teachers in the Theo Harris, or the principals, I should say, in the Theo Harris book were taking this, they just closed the spaces, right? Because when districts tend to treat special ed like a place rather than a service, right, then kids are pushed out all over the place. And has anybody ever done the math of how much time gets lost, how much instructional time just gets lost when kids are taken out even for resource room?
On an average, I'm going to say, depending upon the age of the student, anywhere from, I'm roughly, the older kids, probably about 10, 12 minutes out of every transition. You figure by the time they're picked up from their class, they're walked to wherever they need to walk, they settle in and they start, you're probably looking at a good 10, 12 minutes. The younger guys, it's even longer. 10,
12 minutes so it's 10, 12 minutes there and 10, 12 minutes back.
Per transition. Typically, like our older kids, they walk to their resource rooms on their own. So, sometimes they get a little lost on the way, or they dilly-dally. So you have to allow, and some of our schools are much larger than other schools. So some of our schools, we have additional time built in for transitioning. Just because of that, it's just not humanly possible for some of the larger schools for kids to get where they need to go, even though I really try to build into each of the grade level wings, the appropriate resource room or the appropriate services. It's not always possible. And then the little guys, they take even longer because they're just slower.
Right, or they're walking with somebody and is like,
right, you get caught in the hallway.
And don't hit that, and
Right.
then there's also all that tension, right? Because the line wasn't going on. So let's just be conservative. If it's 15 minutes a day that's being lost in transition, right? That's an hour and a quarter a week times 40 weeks, right? So that's 50 hours of instruction just being lost in transition. That's over a week of school the kids missed just because the service was over there. And that's conservative.
That is conservative because that doesn't take into account them getting pulled for related services, for OT, for PT, for speech, for any of those other things. I'm just talking about a resource room teacher picking up her students or his students from the general education room and just escorting them back to the resource center. That's not all the other interruptions.
And then there's and we haven't put it in the time, for example, when the kid comes back to their regular class. Is that a smooth transition? Are they jumping right into instruction? Is like, no.
Right. That's my question. Sometimes, again, excuse me, because I'm from charter school. So sometimes, again, I feel like charter school is like its own little bubble. So when I hear things like there's 10 to 15 minutes of transition time lost in just a child going from one room to the next, my question would be like, who is held accountable for that lost time? So if the block was to start at 10:45, why was it the block starting at 10:45? There was only 2 minutes for transition time. Now it's really not starting until 10:30.
Because typically if you're to pull your kids, let's say to start your ELA block at 10:45, you're going to have to pull them 10 minutes or 8 minutes earlier from whatever they were doing in their homeroom situation to get them to their ELA on time. So you end up losing in the beginning and the end. So for instance, if I'm a resource room teacher, our kids come in, they do morning meeting, they unpack, attendance, we go pick them up. We have we have 40-minute blocks. So depending upon the grade level, let's just use the 3 through 5. They do 80 minutes of language arts and then 40 minutes of writing. So if we're picking them up right after morning meeting, let's say it ends at 9:30,
right?
We'll be getting back to my classroom, depending upon the size of my building, 9:35. By the time they put their stuff down, by the time they, do what they need to do and they get situated, it's probably another 3 to 4 minutes. So now that's 9 minutes in. And then in order for me to get them back to go to special or get them back to go to, let's say, science or social studies, we're packing up a couple minutes early to get there so that they're not missing anything in the beginning. So you're really losing roughly for every transition about 10 to 15 minutes.
So it may not be 10 to 15 minutes of travel time, but between learning stopping and learning restarting.
Right.
Right.
On the front end and on the back end.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of, and then add speech and OT and PT. So add all these therapists that come in and pick up kids and interrupt their lessons, and take them out. And now they lose speech time because maybe speech is, 20 minutes or 25 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week. You only have that window. It's sort of like our master schedules don't build in time for transitions to walk to specials or walk to lunch or walk to the buses or go to the bathroom.
Let's walk back to Adriana, the way you were posing that, because that's a really interesting piece, right, around accountability. Right. So work that, spin that out a little bit more for us. Well,
so again, at charter school, so our leaders ensure that every block starts on time at a given time. And if it doesn't start on time, then there's, emails and follow-ups and things like that. So if say our special teacher is coming to get our kids at 9:45 because her block starts in 2 minutes, she's coming to get them at the end of whatever block they were in, at the very end, and she knows that that block ends at 9:45, so that's when she's there at the door, and she walks them to ensure that her block starts on time. So they don't necessarily shave off like the back end of their previous block. They come get them at the end. But again, I just think that just speaks to like the systems and routines that a leader potentially puts into place to ensure that like every moment matters, every minute matters in the classroom. So it is up to you as a teacher to ensure that no time is wasted. Like even in our classrooms, like if you walk into a classroom, it's so fast paced and so like it moves insane. Because again, like the leaders, I guess, in our organization just say like, we don't have that time to waste. So when I hear like 15 minutes is lost, I'm like, how do we lose 15 minutes?
So, but it sounds like they may also,
again, on the back end and on the.
And I think there, from what I heard you say before, there may be another structural piece going on in your school that facilitates that.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you don't have small groups of kids being pulled out for any kind of services. Am I right?
No, we do.
You do.
Mm-hmm.
So what about those kids in transition time?
So really it's not that much of a loss of time. They leave from one block and they go right down the hall to the next block, and they come to the other block right on time.
So it's blocked into, so there was a block of instruction that was ending, and they go, and kids go their various ways.
Yeah, with the teacher, of course. Yeah, it's a K4, so it's always with the teacher.
And what are the other kids doing when those kids are getting their support services?
They're moving on to their next block with the lead teacher. So the special teacher would come in. She's at the door. The kids who know they go with her, they stand up responsibly and walk out while I'm able to carry out the rest of the day or the lesson. I don't tell them.
Are you guys teaching parallel curricula at that point? Are you teaching
yes
at different levels?
Yeah.
And when those two teachers, how are you guaranteeing that the kids are both progressing at a parallel rate also?
Well, there's like a multitude of things. They're like daily assessments that we take. For math, they're like these things called Spiral, and I get their data back every day from the specialist teacher. At the end of the week, there's the Spiral quizzes that goes into like our database as a network. And those kids aren't different from my rest of my classroom. They're all in my classroom. So when you pull up my data, it includes those kids as well as my.
So you back to the accountability idea. You're both accountable for the progress of all of them.
Right. So when the data comes back, it's like, okay, Miss So-and-so, this is how he did. What can we do when you pull them to make them better? Something like that.
Right. That's unusual. I'll be honest with you. There are very few places where that's working that well.
Yeah, and I feel like as I'm reading, and again, like sometimes I think I live on a cloud when it comes to like being in charter schools. As I'm reading, I think my school really is like a special place in that like some of the things that I've heard is just like insane.
That's good.
Yeah.
Adriana, could I just ask a question? How many hours or how many minutes are you with your kids a day?
So my school day, kids come in, you have to be to school by 7:30. I'm with them at 6:45 when they come in at breakfast, and everyone leaves by 4:30.
Okay, so that's part of the difference. Our kids, we don't have that time.
Yeah.
And the other thing is unfortunately we work off of master schedules. So you innately have almost like a middle school bell schedule without the bell.
Yeah,
you have that passing time built in. We don't. Because at a public level, like we are mandated to provide X amount of minutes of education, right? So on paper, it has to be 40, 40, 40, X, Y, and Z. And then on top of that, we have the contractual demands of the union where teachers can't teach more than 5 periods consecutively and all the other pieces. We just don't, it's just not built into the schedule. But we only have our kids, I think it's like 6 a little over 6 hours a day by the time you take the lunch out and by the time you take the specials out and all that other kind of stuff. So we have a much shorter school day than you do.
Yeah, and I really do genuinely love hearing about like public school system.
Yeah.
It teaches me so much. Like, school is a whole nother beast.
I wish we had that time, because if we had that time, we would be doing a lot more, but we don't, unfortunately. I mean, I have schools that we have 3 different tiers. My elementary schools operate off of 2 tiers. So we have buses that are literally perpetually picking up, dropping off, picking up, dropping off, picking up, dropping off. So it's, some kids.
That becomes right. So that becomes this issue of resource.
Yeah.
Whether we have enough resources to get where we want to go, including time. I will say it's more than likely true that teachers in public districts are getting paid better than the teachers in the charters, right? So there's those issues around resources. One of the interesting things that you'll see in the model that I think Principal Tracy shows, where they do the mapping of where the kids are and the different services and so forth, is that's a resource neutral shift. In other words, they didn't add any more teachers, right? They just provided their services a whole lot smarter.
Yeah.
And most of it implicitly. One of the things that we have found out is that in looking at inclusion done across the country, if you look at inclusion done well and inclusion done badly and inclusion done in between, if you take all of them together, what we know is that kids with disabilities do better in inclusion. Like when it's, just across the whole thing, take that all into account, it's better. And kids who do not have identified disabilities, they're not harmed. Okay, so that's the other argument, right? Is that, those kids are holding these other kids back, and so forth. We've taken this discussion a little longer than I expected, so I think it's a good time to take a break, and we'll come back to it in a little bit. So let's take 10. I have 7:05, so we'll be back here at 7:15. Okay, see you in a few minutes. We're back. Hi. So, you know, underlying a lot of the discussion that we've been having are some sort of important and really challenging attitudes about what it means to belong in school, right? If the idea is we have schools where we're going to teach everybody who's here, everybody who belongs, that's fine to say, right? But there's some underlying pieces to that that can get a little challenging. And so I want to take a quick dive into that. It's a very short dive. So, you know, what are we talking about in terms of authentic belonging? Start with a little bit of history. So, you know, we've had many movements to be included, right? We have, of course, the civil rights movement based around race. We've had civil rights for women and women's suffrage. We've had immigrants inclusion there and so forth. And the central argument for every one of those movements has always been, we are as normal as the dominant group. We're as normal, if we're talking about suffrage, right, 100 years ago, we are as normal as men, we should be allowed to vote, right? We are as normal as whites, we should be allowed to vote and have full citizenship. We are as normal as people who live here. So the interesting piece there is that inclusion is predicated on being normal, which then, you know, the argument can be, well, people who are not normal, there's a reason to exclude them or a reason to deny them their rights. And so even both sides of that equation sort of accept that normalcy is the ticket for getting in the door. But as I said before, you know, that can also validate the idea that not being normal is your ticket out. And so, you know, whenever we have sort of the assumptions of a bell curve as being the way that we're going to define who belongs here, people who are perceived as being on ends of that spectrum, ends of that curve, you build a rationale for not belonging. Instead of, I belong here just because I exist. This is why I should be here, right? I get my rights just because I'm here, right? So in our schools, it's a really interesting thing because we have to look at, when we're saying included, included into what? Or you know, I actually have misquoted Malcolm here. I used to think that this quote was from Malcolm, which is integrate into what? But I haven't been able to actually substantiate that quote, so I think I have that wrong. But the idea is, if my belonging in a classroom means that I have to approximate what is considered normal for that classroom, right? That's different from, will the place expand to accommodate me? And that's why I mean by this idea of inclusive versus expansive. Will the school do whatever it takes, right, for me to be here? Or does the school have these criteria that can be used to rationalize my exclusion? Those could be behavioral criteria, they could be academic criteria, right? And we can unpack this more as the semester goes on, but that's really powerful stuff, right? And when we hear those arguments around, well, I just don't have the time, energy, whatever, to meet the needs of all the kids, because, I mean, I got to start with the normal kids. I just don't have what it takes to differentiate what I'm doing for everybody. That's implicitly the same argument, right? And that's implicitly the argument that kids who are abnormal or deviant or different are somehow robbing resources from everybody else. And as leaders, that's a tough one for us to deal with. Right? And it's a challenging argument to say, no, it's our job to make this work for everybody who's here, especially when we're public schools. Especially when we're public schools. Now, private schools say, listen, if you don't like it, you go somewhere else, right? And there are a lot of charter schools who do the same. Not everyone, but there are a lot of charters who do. And they'll make the argument in a very paternalistic and kind way. They'll say, oh, you seem like a very lovely kid. We just don't have the services you need, honey. You'll just have to go somewhere else, right? And system-wide, that can be problematic. I mean, one of the things, for example, that happened with New Orleans is that New Orleans, after Katrina, charter schools really proliferated. And kids would come to the charter schools, and the charters would say, make the argument I just made. And then the New Orleans public schools were becoming de facto a special ed public school system, right? Because they were the only ones who had to take everybody. And so, you know, I mean, I think that the attitudes that we have to try to encourage as leaders are, you know, a rigorous kind of love and encouragement, right? Teach me when I'm most unteachable. Love me when I'm most unlovable. And we as a faculty become unconditionally encouraging. This is what it's going to take. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but we're going to do it, right? That's what we're committed to. It is, as Kim, you know, you were talking about the pushback you're getting. Hi, you've talked about the pushback that you've gotten in different schools. Susanna, and you may have stories of that yourself, but I'd be interested to hear what you think would happen if you started having this dialogue in your schools.
I think
Kim, you're
Sorry,
good.
go ahead, Kai, you go first.
I think, you know, this is a conversation in New York City that we have often. And obviously it's something that I feel strongly about. And I work a lot around inclusivity. And the first time I've heard you talk about expansive education, it like blew my mind using that term. And so every time I have a conversation or I do a training, like I did one today on, I do a training on inclusive practices for physical education teachers. For a long time, students who got APE were separate. They weren't part of physical education with their peers. And it's been a big thing in the city for the past few years to try to make sure we're including all our students that they could. You know, like Dr. B said, students just do so much better when they're with their peers and not with other adults. It's just so much better for them. And so it takes a lot of people have the old mindset that no, they need to be separate, they need this, and they have their reasons behind it. So I feel like I talk, you know, last semester you spoke about this a little bit, and when you use that language and explained it in this way, and I kind of referenced that a little bit, the response is really interesting. People kind of look at me like, you know, you're right. And not so much like, you know, it's very different than when you say like you need to include everyone instead of when you say, and I feel like when I talk to people and I say, instead of saying like, we're going to modify what you're doing, you're going to make it accessible for everyone, right? And when you talk like that and we talk about it being expansive, so it's more of a, I don't know, it's talking more in the positive, I guess, and it's just making everyone on that equal level that I find that when I start having this conversation, people buy in a little more.
It's fascinating. Other folks, what are you finding? Or what do you think would happen if you had this conversation? You may not have had it yet, but what do you think might happen?
I think time tends to be a barrier in public school. Teachers are being asked to do more and more with less time. There's always, I'm finding over the years that I've been in this position, all we seem to do is assess. And I think teaching is taking a hit because of that. I think technology is also causing teaching to take a hit. We tend to want to bring in remedial programs such as, let's say, iReady or, programs such as that. And, I'm just finding, between trying to acclimate kids into an environment where they need to be able to function, coupled with all of the initiatives that happen in public schools, coupled with teachers that are being asked to do more and more with less time, coupled with it just seems it's very, I just see this overwhelming notion of how
I think
with a lot of staff.
That's a great point. I've had the same experience, right, of coming quickly up against the fear and resentment, right, from teachers. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm already under the gun here, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've had to take on very explicitly, with mixed results, I'm going to be perfectly honest, is saying, I got you, right? I've got, like, I am protecting you and holding you in the same way that I want you to protect and hold your kids, right? You're mine, I got you, we're gonna do this. If you think somebody else is threatening you from above, with respect, like you're talking about, because like what's the implicit threat of the testing and so forth is that it's gonna reflect badly on the teachers, right? They're gonna take a hit from that because of all the regimes that we know are out there, right? And it's partly my job to say, I got you. When I was principal in Syracuse, I'll tell you, that was right directly on the table, that to do the turnaround that I was hired to do, half my teachers were going to get transferred to another school, right? But even putting that aside, I said, listen, if we come up with a great plan for turnaround, I will argue to anybody that they shouldn't transfer anybody here if you guys can all buy in. But even so, this was shortly after not No Child Left Behind, but what was Obama's follow-on to No Child Left Behind? No, between
the two?
Race to the Top.
Yeah.
Race to the Top, right? Part of the argument for Race to the Top was that student test scores would become part of teachers' evaluations, right? Mm. And Governor Cuomo had said, anybody who receives a developing rating 2 years in a row, you're going to lose your job. And teachers in my building were terrified. I'm like, that's not going to happen. You can't, it's not going to happen. You're never going to find enough teachers to fill, enough new people to fill those spaces. He's just shooting off his mouth. Let's be reasonable about this for a minute, right? And people kind of went, yeah, maybe, but I don't really know you yet, right? Like, like that sounds reasonable, but you're still kind of new around here. So I'm not sure if I'm with you on that one. But it was at least demonstrating, like, I get your fear here. I get the struggle that you're under. And I'm here with you to help you work that through. Like, part of the common way of going about this can be to demonize the teachers who don't want those kids, because now they have an even higher incentive to not want those kids. It's like, those kids are going to pull me down. No, I don't want them on my list. Like Adriana, you were saying, right? That all the results for all those kids are yours, mm-hmm. Right? And so it sounds like in your building, you've got a culture around genuinely taking responsibility for that with others.
Yes.
Yeah. So how do the folks at your school, how does the leadership talk about it? How do teachers talk about it?
Well, one, everything there is with the mindset that scholars kind of deserve this, and we are there in order to offer them this service. So anything that hinders any child from growing is not serving the child, as and allowing them to reach their their potential. So when we think about being more so expansive, and this is just to touch back on like the assessment piece that I think Kimberly mentioned, we do often like assess a lot, like we take like quizzes and we turn the data around frequently. But our leaders require us to then action plan as to what are we now about to do with this data that we just received. And then not only do we have to action plan, we have to implement these action steps and then reflect on them and then report back data that's taken place after we've done the action plan. So again, I just think like sometimes, as you guys mentioned, at charter schools, we have that extra time. And there are certain pieces of this that like, you know, charter schools don't really have that union. So we don't really like bite back too much as teachers. And we really just, I guess, just do a lot of go above and beyond to serve those kids, all kids.
Well, so one of the reasons I asked, right, is that the whole idea for charters in the first place was giving charters the opportunity to do things differently,
Right.
that could be taught to the other schools,
Yeah.
right? Like that if the system had gotten stuck, if by and large the public system has gotten pretty stuck in some bad patterns, right? Or a ton of bad patterns, that charters could have the freedom to innovate and try things
Right.
that we could take back and everybody could learn from. It wasn't supposed to be competitive,
Right.
you know, to the degree it is now.
Yeah.
It's almost a war, right, between
Yeah.
charters. And there are plenty of charters doing it badly, but it sounds like where it's going well, right? These are some lessons to be learned. So one of the things that, and we can talk about this later, the use of assessment and how you do it, right? You guys have heard the phrase, I'm sure, you know, you don't fatten a calf by weighing it. Like just doing the testing by itself doesn't help.
Right.
Right? It's if you're going to actually use that as formative assessment, right, to actually change your instruction and actually help the kids plan for themselves how they're going to get better, right? That's a whole different scene. So that's but it sounds also like one of the things that I heard there is that there's a sense of mission.
Yes. Yeah.
About the school, right? And have you encountered anybody who didn't buy into that mission?
Yeah, definitely, all the time. And so friends who don't buy into the mission either go to different charter schools or they just leave us. Because honestly,
Are they still there, right? No, they're gone.
yeah, you have to buy into the mission in order to put in that extra time, in order to put in those extra hours. When that data turns around on Tuesday, you already have written your reteach plan by Wednesday. Like if you don't buy into that mission of every single minute counts in this day because this child needs a seat at the table, then they usually just leave.
So that's back to the piece we were talking about before, right? It's having that mission and that vision. This is what we're going to do, right? And that's not, we'll have to figure out how we get there,
Right.
but that's not up for discussion.
Right.
If you're not with it, you should do something else.
Yeah.
Right? This is not your place. That's awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at the time. These are topics we'll keep coming back to. Okay. And I want to ask. I want to touch base with you about your longer term projects. I know some of you are just getting started, so you may very well have questions about how do I even go about thinking through this. We're all at the beginning stage of the equity audit. So let's talk a little bit about that. If you've got any questions, stuff that's been coming up for you, maybe you haven't even had a chance to get at it, but you've just started thinking about it, right? And again, for Adriana, Susanna, especially Susanna and Kim, this is your first time even talking about it, thinking about it. Floor's open if you've got any questions, concerns, successes, whatever. Anybody? All four of you.
One of my questions was, I know that Susanna and Kim are new, but I was thinking maybe Kaya, what were some topics that you came up with for your equity audit, or like if you are thinking about any?
So for last semester, the first semester, I was supposed to do something on anti-bullying. In New York City, we call it Respect for All. So I did an equity audit on our Respect for All program.
I'm going to back up a second. Within the program here, there's another one of these audit things that we're calling HIB in a Jersey context, right? Harassment, intimidation, and bullying.
Oh.
So for that, Kai is talking about how she approached that assignment, which you guys will get to in another semester. So go ahead, Kai.
Right, and so this semester with the equity audit around, sorry, you could hear my kids. I'm trying to still figure out, because there's so much information about a lot of areas when it comes to this specific, I don't want to, Dr. B gave me the recommendation to try to hone in on a specific little area with what? Like a
dimension of it, right?
Right. So I'm still kind of going back and forth with which one I want to do, just because the one I want to do, I think, is still too big. And so I'm still trying to whittle it down to be really just one little area of it. I haven't really done that yet.
Okay. Gotcha.
But I will let you know when I figure it out.
Yeah, just to bounce ideas.
I'm planning on really spending time looking at some information next week to try to, see what would be like my best approach.
Got it.
Does that help? I don't know.
No, yeah, that was great. Making it, fine tuning it. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you have to get the baseline data to start with. Who's in our school? What services do we have? How many people do we have devoted to each of these things? That's kind of the baseline to start with. From there, I was just trying to pull it up. I'm just gonna pull it up for a second. Give me a minute. Let's see, assignments. I'm going to share this with you. Hold on. Where'd you go? So, the general data, which is the start of this thing, it says equity audit data collection and analysis.
Right.
You have this document. You'll be able to download this, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is this general data piece. Everybody's going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to look at the status of labeling at your school. How many students are labeled gifted? We want the total number, the fraction, and the percentage. How many students are receiving Tier 2 and Tier 3 RTI interventions? You may not have that. A, you may not have those interventions going on at your school, or B, nobody may know. Okay? How many students are labeled with a disability? How many students are labeled ESL or bilingual? How many students are your students, but they've been sent to other schools? Kaya and Kim, you might want to do this at a district level, or you may just want to pick a school. Kaya, same thing. Right? How many students have any other kind of label? And please tell us what the label is, right? So question 4 is an interesting one. I've seen schools, for example, that talk about Tier 2 and Tier 3 services. I've also seen schools that talk about Tier 2 and Tier 3 kids. And that gets back to that discussion we were having earlier.
Yeah.
So those two tables right there, everybody's going to do. That's your baseline. From there, you might choose to do students with disabilities, or looking at social class, or so this is a long one, right? It goes like 23 questions. Race and ethnicity. Okay, so let's just take race and ethnicity for as an example. How many students of color are in your school? And disaggregate by the race. Compare that to the district. Looking into students labeled for special ed, of the kids labeled for special ed, what fraction and percentage are students of color? It really leads you through each of these possible things. Okay? Same thing for RTI, same thing for gifted. Compare that to the total staff. More people of color in your school. Certified staff, uncertified staff. People of color serving on your school board. Compared to the, see where this is going? Then you start to look at race and discipline data. Students who were suspended in the past year, if you can, divide into in-school and out-of-school suspension. And disaggregate those data by race. Just looking at race, and now we get into achievement data. We're looking at 31 questions. Okay, now you might not get information on all of these. Your district might not even have it. That's part of the, in a larger sense, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's interesting to know what we don't count as well as what we do. Okay. So what I'm suggesting you do is you pick one of those sections, English language learners, or race, or gender, or social class. And when we get to social class, really the only reliable statistics, the only reliable data we have are free and reduced lunch status. Okay, that's just all we've got.
Yeah.
And we kind of take that as a proxy, as a synonym for being working class. Okay. Now, I for those of you who are just starting out, I would also suggest to you that a number of people have derived their action research projects from something that I learned in doing the equity audit. Okay, and so that can be, it can be a way of, as they say, feeding two birds with one hand. It can generate work for you in both areas. So that would be something to think about. Does that help?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Just so I'm clear, so when we choose one of these categories, for instance, if I was considered sexual orientation and gender identity, looking at number 6, I would gain all the information for all the sexual identity and gender questions. And then I'm thinking about how does the gender demographics in my school, as far as like my school staff, male, female, transgender, how does that impact student learning?
Yeah. Now, I will say, interestingly, I mean, Colleen Capper, one of the authors of this thing, although she is really, really attentive to issues of gender identity, this piece is almost 15 years old now. right? And so I know her thinking has even traveled quite a bit from when this piece was written. And so you may be encountering, you know, an even more complex and thoughtful school now than she was anticipating when they wrote this.
Right.
First place. So it's also great, right? But just so you know, this instrument has its limitations. You know, as a matter of fact, this was the first. Where was I encountering this? Oh, I know. I was reading some dissertations for a prize this week, and came across the phrase "gender expansive youth." So going back to that idea of expansive, right? They're not sitting on one identity, right? Whatever it is, they're not sitting on one. They have an expansive understanding of gender. And I have to say, I got schooled by my queer kid around the Q in LGBTQ for questioning. Maybe I'm just showing my age here, but when I heard LGBTQ and the Q meant questioning and not queer, oops, we lost Kaya. Hopefully we'll get her back. I used to think that meant questioning, that they were questioning their own gender identity. But what I've come to learn is no, they're just questioning the whole idea of gender identity. It's not a self question, it's a question of the status quo. Oh, I didn't think of it that way.
Interesting.
Any other things arising for you now with that?
I want to focus on English language learners and special education. Would that be too broad to dig up, or is there?
Right, like give it a shot. I mean, if you are you looking at English language learners kids who are dually labeled?
No, like newcomers, I would say. Newcomers that, you know, come here and we don't know what kind of disability they might have, and it might be difficult to identify.
Right,
And
we don't know which way to, like.
Like, how do you start? Like, I have this one kid who is Egyptian, so he speaks, I want to say, Arabic. So he doesn't, he has picked up the listening and the speaking, but the reading and the writing, it hasn't come for him yet. And it's been a year and months that he's been here, so he can't even retain the sight words. So then, you know, it's hard to pinpoint, do I refer him because the duration, like the time period is too long, or is it because the writing is so different as opposed to the English language?
Great question. So if that is, you know, if you're in a district, I mean, the school I was referring to you before, we had kids speaking 19 languages, right? There was no way we had fluency in 19 languages amongst the faculty. I mean, there were 2 or 3 faculty, 2, maybe 1, who was fluent in Spanish. But we had kids speaking, you know, Burmese and Karen and Vietnamese and Arabic and so forth. So yeah, those are big questions. So back to your original question, is it too much?
Broad or?
I would encourage you to do no, I think it's a great question. I think it's great. And if you want to go for it, I would, right? And out of that could arise a terrific action research project, right? Yeah. If the question, for example, is how do we distinguish?
Right.
Or how do we make, even broader, how do we make sensible decisions about how to support our kids? Right. Yeah, that'd be great.
Like,
I'm mindful of the time, so I wanna see if we can just flip to action research questions. We kind of bled into that a little bit. Any action research questions coming up for you?
No, not off the top of my head. I'm just grappling with a couple of ideas, hopefully being able to blend the two, the equity and the
Okay.
equity audit and access.
Again, I keep checking the discussion boards. You know, if you have questions, you can put them there. So that's another sort of version of the 48 hours piece that you were talking about, right? That's a place for that discussion to keep going too. Maybe I'll set up a 48 hours discussion board. Like I was thinking of this, now I want to come back at it.
Right.
Right? I'll try that. That's cool. All right, I want to get us back just to wrapping up for the evening. All right, so things coming up. Your first journal is due a week from tonight. Okay. Use writing, audio, or video, up to you. Can be you know, your personal reflections on your purpose for being a leader, or if you want to interview somebody for that, that's also fine. Either one of those is good. Okay. If it's written, it's several pages. If it's recorded, it's 10 to 15 minutes. I've gotten one set of SMART goals. Kim and Susanna, I don't know that we talked about the SMART goals piece for this semester. I've gotten your pre-assessment piece. I'll send this along to you. It's kind of, after you've thought about all the things you want to accomplish in your semester, okay, this can be a nice way of sort of focusing in on a few things that you want to be sure to get done this semester. Okay. And I'll send it to you each with some directions on it. Okay. I'm not trying to make extra work for you. What I'm trying to do is to help you sort of grab this gigantic internship and be able to be sensible about it, right? So it doesn't seem totally overwhelming. Okay.
That sounds good.
Site visits. I really would like to get those down before we get too deep into the semester. Okay. So if we haven't already had it, let's get it set up. First one, I prefer in person, especially with you three who are just starting out. Okay. We could do follow-ups via Zoom or in person, but especially I'll come down to Elizabeth, you know, I'll come to Franklin, you know, I'll come. So there's that. And just to give you a heads up on what comes up next in the Theo Harris book is these next two chapters get at some of those topics that you've heard about endlessly in leadership classes and endlessly in any discussion about leadership, which is climate of the building and the achievement gap, right? And I think you'll hear these 5 folks wrestle with those in some interesting ways. So that's what you can expect to be looking forward to there. Any questions about what's coming up? All right. And for our closing tonight, in honor of Thanksgiving, just going to ask you to think, what's your favorite line? What's the best line you've ever heard about love and education?
That's a tough one.
That is.
You say love and education?
Yeah.
Teaching comes from the heart, no?
There you go. Teaching comes from the heart.
Yeah. I have a.
I can share one with you. The guy who was my, actually he was my student teaching supervisor. So back in 1987, he was he was like the guru of wait time. You know about wait time with us? And he used to say, he says, there's only two absolute things in teaching: love and wait time. Which was pretty cool. It's like, if you love your students and you give them the opportunity to think, that's all you got to do. That's always stuck with me.
Your patience.
The patience, yes.
Something I have is to make a difference in somebody's life. You don't have to be brilliant or smart, or you just have to care. So I guess same thing as love, caring.
Yeah, that's right. That's it. Yeah. You don't have to use the word love.
Right, yeah.
You can pass. This isn't a test.
I think for me, I don't know if it's necessarily a quote. I just see how just the socioeconomic diversity in my district impacts children, the number of children that are homeless, the number of children that are in foster care. Sometimes teachers are the first people they meet that actually they learn love from, because they may have been taken from their parents, or their home life is just not anything that I think I would ever be able to imagine. We have just a lot of fractured kids.
So school is a loving place.
It is. It's a safe place. It's a loving place. Yeah.
Like I said, Adrian, if you want to pass, you can pass.
I think you want to pass on this. I'm not good at off the top of the head quotes, but
No problem. It's just
everyone's response.
I was just trying to be cute, and find a way for that over class the night before Thanksgiving, before Valentine's Day.
I'm gonna steal it. Tomorrow we have a meeting, and my boss always puts it out there. Like sometimes we start off with, a heaven and a heck or something. I'm gonna, in the morning, I'm gonna say to her, why don't we do this? I like it.
I will say, there's another practical way in which this idea has come up for me, which is when I've interviewed new teachers, and I'll say to them, so, why do you want to teach? They go, I love kids. I'm like, you better have more than that, right? Because I just don't want to hear that anymore. Like if you, like it's good that you love kids. Don't get me wrong. And if you don't love kids, you shouldn't be doing this work. But you got to have more than that, right? There's people who think that's all. That's enough, right? So, anyways, really nice to see you guys. We'll meet again in a few weeks. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'll see you online. Okay.
Nice meeting everyone.
Have a good night. Nice meeting everyone.
Nice meeting, Professor Bernstein. I just have